The prison station floated in the dark void near a dying star, its metal walls reflecting the pale light like a scar on the universe. Ships passed by silently, indifferent to the prisoners inside. It was a place built not to hold life, but to erase it, to erase memory, to erase hope. For most of the Galactic Alliance, it was little more than a forgotten relic, a name spoken only in whispers. But inside its walls, suffering lived and breathed, feeding on every hour, every day, every year. Prisoner 731 sat in the corner of her cell. Her tall, graceful frame had been reduced to a fragile silhouette, her limbs thin and trembling from years of near starvation. Her kind had once been known for elegance and strength across several star systems, but now she barely resembled the creature she had been. Her eyes, however, remained alive, sharp and piercing, a quiet fire smoldering beneath the hollow exhaustion. The guards had long stopped using her real name. Names were irrelevant here. Labels were enough. Numbers kept people from feeling too much. 731 had been alive long enough to understand that hunger was not the worst thing a prison could do. It was the isolation, the indifference, the way the world seemed to have forgotten she existed. Each day she received the smallest portion of paste-like food, enough to keep her alive, but never enough to satisfy her body or mind. When other prisoners fought over scraps, she had learned to stay quiet, to wait, to watch. Trusting anyone here was dangerous. No kindness was ever real. The human arrived on the station quietly, with none of the ceremony or warning that usually preceded a new prisoner transfer. His name was Elias Ward, though guards simply called him the Human. He was calm, steady, and observant. When he walked down the corridor, his gaze swept over the cells, lingering briefly on her. It was not the glance of curiosity or judgment that other prisoners or guards offered. It was something softer, something unrecognizable in a place like this. She barely lifted her head when he paused. She had spent years expecting only cruelty. Any softness in another's gaze was a trap, yet something about him felt different. There was a patience, a quiet intelligence in his stance, the kind that made a prisoner hesitate even in fear. Days passed. Elias learned quickly how the prison worked. The guards were careless. Food was thrown through small slots without thought, left to clatter to the floor. The weak went hungry. The strong survived. Prisoners watched each other like predators waiting for a mistake. But Elias did not fight, did not complain. He studied, observed, waited. He noticed how 731's tray was always smaller, how she barely had the strength to lift it. How she sometimes went a cycle without eating at all. Hunger had made her cautious, wary, fragile, but it had not broken her. Something inside her still resisted the endless suppression, the slow decay the station imposed. On the 5th day of his arrival, he made his decision. When the guard's footsteps faded after a meal cycle, he took half of his portion, wrapping it carefully in a scrap of cloth from his sleeve. He approached the narrow slot between their cells and spoke softly. "Here," he said. She did not move. She did not even look up. Years of pain and betrayal had taught her that nothing came without a cost. "I said here," he repeated, a little louder but still gentle. Her voice came out rough and hoarse, as if her throat had forgotten how to speak. "Why?" "Because you are hungry," he said simply. For a long moment she stared at him. Hunger, desperation, suspicion, and disbelief warred in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her without fear or disdain. And yet here was this human offering her food, not taking, not threatening, not demanding. Slowly she reached forward. Her fingers were trembling, her nails were cracked. Her skin was pale and taut over thin bones. She almost dropped the bundle, and he instinctively moved closer, steadying it with his hands. Warmth, human warmth. She flinched slightly at the contact, unused to the sensation. "Easy," he whispered. "No rush." She lifted the bundle carefully and unwrapped it. The smell struck her like a shock, real food, savory and rich, not the bland paste she had been fed for years. Her lips parted and tears threatened to fall. She had forgotten the feeling of being nourished, the taste of life. She hesitated, expecting a trap, expecting the guards to emerge and mock her, expecting the food to turn to ash, but nothing happened. She took a small bite. Then another. Her body, weakened for years, responded immediately. Strength returned to her limbs. Her mind, fogged by constant starvation, cleared. She chewed slowly, savoring the sensation of sustenance, something she had long thought impossible. Elias watched quietly, patient. He did not speak, he did not demand thanks. He only made sure she had enough to survive, that she did not choke on the sudden abundance. When she finished, she looked at him, confusion and awe filling her eyes. Why? She whispered. I will survive, he said. Humans are stubborn that way. Something broke inside her, though she did not yet understand what it was. Years of hopelessness had left her hollow, but now, with the first act of unguarded kindness in a lifetime, a small spark ignited. It was not just the food. It was the recognition that someone had chosen to see her not as a prisoner, not as a number, not as a monster, but as a being worth saving. The cameras above recorded everything. Guards watched, frowning at the screen. One muttered, "Why would a human share food with that creature?" But they could not understand. Humans were strange like that. Sometimes they saw past fear and cruelty. Sometimes they acted for reasons no one else could comprehend. And sometimes those small acts of choice and courage could shift the course of entire lives. She curled up with the food still in her hands, tasting, feeling, remembering. It was the first step back to life, back to strength, back to hope. The prison walls still loomed, the hunger still haunted, but something inside her shifted. And somewhere deep in her chest, she began to believe maybe, just maybe, survival was possible. Elias left the slot quietly, leaving her to finish her meal. The station remained indifferent, dark, and silent. But inside her cell, warmth had returned. Something fragile, precious, and dangerous, hope, had begun to grow. Days turned into cycles, and cycles blurred into weeks. Prisoner 731 had survived on scraps for years. Yet now, after the human's first act of kindness, she found herself thinking about food in a way she had not dared for a long time. It was not only about filling an empty stomach anymore. It was about feeling alive. That simple meal had done more than nourish her body. It had reminded her mind and heart that she was still a being capable of hope, of trust, of connection. Elias watched quietly, learning the routines of the prison. Guards were predictable in their cruelty, indifferent in their neglect, but human patience and observation could turn even small opportunities into survival. He noticed the schedules, the weak points in the patrols, the way the other prisoners reacted to scarcity. And most importantly, he noticed 731. At first, she avoided him. Suspicion had become a second skin, impossible to shed in a place like this. Her eyes followed him through the corridor, narrow slits of alertness, but she never raised her head enough to speak. She had learned that words were dangerous. Trust was a weapon she no longer had. Yet she could not stop thinking about the warmth of his hands, the careful way he had guided the food to her mouth. One evening, when the station lights flickered during a power cycle, Elias approached her cell again. He carried a small bundle, wrapped in cloth and carefully balanced. He had managed to gather a few extra rations, portions the guards would never notice if they were discreet. "Here," he said softly, holding the bundle at the slot. She froze, her instincts screamed to reject it. She had lived years thinking every offer was a trap, but curiosity edged forward and hunger, a long-forgotten, gnawing hunger, pushed her closer. He waited. He did not speak. He did not demand. He simply held out the food, a silent promise that nothing would happen if she took it. Slowly, her hands reached out, tentative, trembling. The moment she touched the bundle, her fingers brushed his. Heat, a human warmth that had nothing to do with food, surged through her. She recoiled slightly, startled by the sensation, yet unable to pull away completely. "You can eat," he whispered. "It's yours. No one will take it from you." She lifted the cloth and examined the contents. A small portion of protein, soft fruits unfamiliar to her species, and something sweet she remembered from her childhood. She had almost forgotten how it felt to have choices, to select what to consume, to savor flavor. Her mouth parted hesitant as she took the first bite. Her eyes widened. The food was rich, real, flavorful, more than her body had ever known in this prison. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting herself feel the taste, the texture, the nourishment. It was overwhelming. Elias watched her carefully, prepared to guide her if needed. He knew that after years of starvation, the body could not handle too much at once. But she was stronger than she appeared. "Thank you," she whispered, almost inaudibly. He shook his head. "No thanks needed, just eat." The next few days became a delicate rhythm. Elias found ways to share small portions of food with her each cycle. He learned which moments the guards were least attentive. He learned when she was willing to reach forward and accept it, and when she pulled back, distrustful. With every shared meal, the invisible wall between them grew thinner. Words were few. She still spoke little, mostly answering in monosyllables, but gestures became the new language. A nod, a glance, a cautious touch through the slot, each one a connection, fragile yet real. One day, a guard sneered as Elias approached her cell. "Sharing food again, human?" he mocked. "Want to get yourself hurt?" Elias' jaw tightened, but he did not react violently. He only said, "I eat what I want." The guard laughed, leaving with a warning glare. 731 watched, a strange curiosity in her eyes. Humans were unpredictable. They did not always follow rules, yet somehow they survived. Somehow they could defy the expectations of cruelty without consequence. That defiance, quiet and steady, was something she had never witnessed before. Slowly, she began to speak more. First, just names of the foods he gave her, then short phrases about how they reminded her of home, of warmth, of life beyond the prison walls. Elias listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. He allowed her to speak, to reclaim small pieces of herself she had thought lost forever. Trust began to grow, though it was cautious and uneven. She would not yet let him touch her directly. She recoiled when his hands lingered too long, but she began to accept his presence. His calmness, his patience, his refusal to hurt her or demand anything in return became a new type of stability she had never known. Then came the first real test. During a routine meal distribution, the power flickered violently. Alarms blared. Guards shouted and chaos erupted as prisoners scrambled for food. In the confusion, someone pushed her to the floor. She fell hard, thin bones rattling, the small portion of food slipping from her hands. Instinct took over. Elias lunged through the corridor, ignoring guards' orders, ignoring the risk. He reached her in seconds, steadying her, scooping up the spilled food. His hands were firm, protective, and careful, cradling her as if she were more fragile than she appeared. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. She shook her head, swallowing a sob. "No, it's nothing. It's not nothing if it hurts you," he said softly. "Stay close, don't let them scare you." For the first time, she allowed herself to lean slightly into his presence. Just slightly, just enough to feel the warmth of someone caring for her without condition. The guards, momentarily distracted by the chaos, barely noticed. But she did. The realization struck her with power. For the first time, she had someone on her side. Someone who would not betray her, someone who would risk danger to protect her. After that day, her strength began to return slowly. She could stand longer, move faster, and even stretch her arms without collapsing. Each small improvement was fueled by both the food and the strange, unwavering human who had chosen to share it with her. Elias continued to observe and plan. He knew that the prison would not allow them to survive indefinitely if they relied only on stolen rations. He studied patrols, watched the patterns of supply, and began to think of ways to create more opportunities. He could not yet change the system, but he could carve a small corner of life within it. One evening, as the artificial sun of the station flickered on, 731 looked at him with something resembling a smile. It was faint, tentative, but unmistakable. "You're different," she said quietly. "Other humans, they wouldn't do this." Elias shook his head. "Not all humans are the same. Some of us see what others ignore." Her gaze lingered on him. For years, she had expected only cruelty, hunger, and indifference. Yet here was a human who challenged every expectation, who offered kindness without motive, who shared strength without judgment. "Why do you help me?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Because I can," he said simply. "Because someone has to, because you deserve it." She could not argue. Words had failed her for years. Silence had become her armor. Yet she felt something stirring inside her, a sense of possibility. Maybe survival was not just about enduring hunger. Maybe survival could include trust, courage, and the quiet bond that grew between them with each shared meal. And somewhere deep inside, she began to understand that hope was not weakness. Hope was strength. And for the first time in her life, she dared to imagine that she could live, not just exist. The station remained cold, indifferent, and dangerous. Guards continued their rounds. The other prisoners remained suspicious and distant. But within her small cell, within the small acts of human kindness, a seed had been planted. A seed that would grow, slowly, carefully, but relentlessly. And in that darkness, amidst starvation and fear, two unlikely companions began to build a fragile lifeline. One made not of walls or bars, but of trust, patience, and the quiet courage to offer hope where none existed. Weeks passed, and prisoner 731 grew stronger. Her body, once fragile and hollowed by years of hunger, began to regain some of its original strength. Muscles long wasted on neglect slowly returned, and even her posture, once slumped and defeated, began to straighten. But it was not just physical recovery. Her mind, sharpened by survival and hardened by betrayal, now had space to breathe, to plan, to hope. Elias remained by her side, silently guiding, quietly protecting. He had become more than a human who shared food. He had become a lifeline, a reminder that in a universe often cruel and indifferent, some beings still chose to act with kindness. And through his patience, 731 had discovered something she had long forgotten, that she was still capable of trust. One night the alarms blared unexpectedly. The station shuddered as the artificial gravity fluctuated, and warning lights painted the walls red. Guards rushed past, shouting orders and brandishing weapons, while prisoners cowered or scrambled for cover. Chaos erupted, a perfect storm of distraction. Elias grabbed her arm. "Stay with me," he said. His voice was calm, measured, grounding in the storm of panic. She nodded, heart pounding, but not with fear alone. There was something else, determination. She had survived this long. She would not let a few guards or a sudden power failure decide her fate. Together they moved. Their goal was simple: get to a maintenance corridor where the supply lines ran, a place Elias had observed for days, noting weak spots, moments when guards were distracted or security cameras malfunctioned. The corridor was narrow and dark. Every step echoed against the metal walls. She could feel her heart thumping, but the sensation was no longer pure terror. It was energy, focus, a drive to reclaim control over the one part of her life that had been entirely stolen. They reached the maintenance hatch. Elias pried it open with careful precision. Beyond it was a cramped crawl space, but it led to an abandoned service shaft that ran deep into the station. It was risky. If discovered, they could be punished severely, but he had weighed the chance of survival against the consequence of staying trapped. "Can you move?" he asked quietly. "I can," she replied, voice firm, controlled. Together they crawled through the shaft, their movements synchronized by instinct and necessity. Each inch brought them closer to freedom, or at least to a vantage point from which they could make their next move. When they emerged on the other side, the view shocked her. Below, the main atrium of the station sprawled like a frozen ocean of metallic floors and corridors. Guards moved in patterns, prisoners huddled in corners, and the feeding stations, a symbol of control and oppression, glimmered under the artificial light. Elias pointed. "There," he whispered, indicating a storage room holding emergency rations and medical supplies. "We can take what we need, then make it to the escape pods. It won't be easy, but you can do this. I know you can." For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes. Her entire life had been defined by containment, by hunger, by waiting. Taking action, seizing opportunity, defying the rules was foreign. Yet something within her stirred. The trust she had developed in Elias, the belief that kindness could exist, now transformed into courage. Together they moved across the atrium floor, shadows among shadows. Guards were distracted by the chaos caused by the earlier alarm, giving them a small window of opportunity. Every step was tense, every sound amplified. She could feel her pulse, sharp and alive, reminding her that her body, once broken, was now her ally. They reached the storage room. Elias quickly disabled the lock, and 731 slipped inside first, her fingers deftly moving over the crates of supplies. For the first time in years, she felt something more than hunger. She felt agency. She could act. She could choose. She could survive on her own terms. They gathered what they could carry: ration packs, a medkit, and tools that could help them navigate the station. Every item they took was a small rebellion, a declaration that they would not be prisoners forever. Then the warning came. A guard turned the corner too quickly. His eyes locked on them, weapon raised. Time slowed. 731 froze, muscles tense. Elias moved in front of her, blocking her from view, his own stance protective. "You're not supposed to be here," the guard barked. Elias did not flinch. "We're leaving," he said simply. His voice was calm, resolute, unwavering. The guard laughed, a hollow, contemptuous sound. "Try if you dare." In that moment, 731 realized something profound. Fear had ruled her for years, and now it had no power. Elias had shown her that courage was possible, that strength could exist even in the weakest body. And she had discovered within herself a resolve she had thought lost forever. With a sudden surge, she acted. Quick and precise, she triggered the tools they had brought to jam the security panel. The lights flickered, alarms blared, and for a brief moment, chaos became their ally. Elias pushed the guard back with minimal force, enough to distract, not harm, and they slipped past him, moving toward the escape pods. The pods were cramped, claustrophobic, yet offered the only hope. She could feel her breath quicken, but also a strange clarity. Every moment of starvation, every moment of suffering had led to this, to a choice, to action, to survival. Elias entered the pod first, ensuring it was ready, then helped her inside. She collapsed onto the seat, exhausted yet exhilarated. The station's alarms rang in their ears, the shouts of guards behind them, but none of it mattered. In that moment, she was alive, truly alive. He activated the pod's launch sequence. The hatch sealed, and the pod began its slow descent from the station into open space. Outside, stars stretched into lines, the void both terrifying and beautiful. She stared through the small viewport, the universe wide and limitless, and for the first time it did not feel hostile. Elias turned to her. "You did this," he said quietly. "You trusted yourself. You trusted me, that's why we're alive." She looked at him, a faint smile curving her lips. She was still recovering, still weak in some ways, but the spark within her was no longer a fragile ember. It was a fire that would not be extinguished. For years she had endured starvation, fear, and imprisonment. She had believed her life was over, that the universe had forgotten her. But a human had shown her that survival was possible, not through fear or violence, but through patience, kindness, and trust. And now, as the pod drifted through the endless stars, she understood something deeper. Strength was not only measured by the body, but by the courage to hope, to act, and to reclaim life, even when it seemed impossible. The pod floated farther from the station, carrying two unlikely companions who had defied despair and cruelty. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, a canvas of possibilities. She breathed deeply, tasting the air in the pod, tasting freedom, tasting life. "Where to now?" she asked. Elias smiled, glancing at her. "Anywhere the universe will let us go, anywhere we choose." She nodded, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Hunger would no longer control her. Fear would no longer dictate her actions. The universe was vast, full of danger, yes, but also full of possibilities, and she was ready to meet them. In that moment, she was no longer prisoner 731. She was herself again, strong, capable, and alive. And in the silent, infinite expanse of space, she smiled, truly, for the first time in years. The human beside her, steady and unwavering, had done more than share a meal. He had shared hope, and hope, she realized, was stronger than any prison, any hunger, any fear. Together they drifted through the stars. The station, with all its cruelty and darkness, faded behind them. Ahead lay the unknown, but she would face it not as a victim, but as a survivor. And for the first time, she truly believed that life, even in the harshest corners of the universe, could be beautiful.